Hi Biology, Mr. Wegner here. Today we're going to be talking about amphibians and reptiles. So I want you to get out your note packet. There was a message sent out last week that all the packets for pickup at school are ready for the month of February, especially for biology. If you do not have your packet, the notes should be available in this folder, Amphibians and Reptiles and Amphibians Notes 2021. You can either print them out and put your answers there, or you can simply write in the blanks on a piece of lined paper, and then eventually when you do get to school and pick up the note packet, you can transfer them over. So if you don't have the note packet yet, do not freak out. You've already watched the Bill Nye video on amphibians. We're going to go through amphibians today, so this is part one. Let's get started. Importance of reptiles and amphibians. Reptiles and amphibians fill a significant role of the food chain. Both will be predator and prey. They're going to be the ones that eat others, and they're going to be the ones that they themselves are eaten. That's what it means for predator-prey. Rodent and insect populations especially are held in check by these animals. The main diet of reptiles and amphibians is insects, and there are tons of insects all over. In fact, without reptiles and amphibians, they would probably take over the planet. Amphibians are great indicators of the health of a wetland ecosystem. In the Bill Nye video, he talked about that scientists will often measure especially amphibians like frog populations, and when their numbers go down, that's a big indicator that something is wrong with the wetland ecosystem. They are incredibly sensitive. So in other words, some animals can live in an environment, and if things go bad, it doesn't bother them too much. But frogs, toads, things like that, if the ecosystem starts to change a little bit, it drastically affects their numbers and their population. So they are extremely good indicators of what's going on in a wetland situation. They're sensitive to a variety of threats that can serve as early indicators of ecosystem change when monitored over the long term. Pretty much the same idea I was talking about. They're very sensitive, and even the smallest little changes in the ecosystem can mess up their daily routine, their lives, and their numbers. Changes in amphibian populations can often be linked to one of the following clauses, which can all affect ecosystem health. Either pollution, introducing species, maybe a new species or maybe even an invasive species, drought, habitat destruction, disease, ultraviolet radiation, and that would be ultraviolet meaning like from the sun. Changes that are looked at are where they live, number of species, disease, malformation. Malformation means it's not formed correctly. Not formed correctly. Mal often means like something's out of whack. Like if you have a malfunction, it's not functioning correctly. It's malfunctioning. So mal means it's not correct or deformed or something like that. These changes have cascading effects on other aspects of the ecosystem. So in other words, one little change here can lead to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 changes in other places. That's what the word cascading means. Let's talk about amphibians especially. These are vertebrates with a double life. Vertebrates with a double life. Amphibian, a vertebrate that lives both in water and on land. Lives both in water and on land. That's a great definition for amphibian. Characteristics, they are ectothermic, cold-blooded. Most are oviparous, they lay eggs. The eggs lack shells, so they are deposited in water or very moist places. What do you mean lacks a shell? Well, it lacks a hard shell. You can see there's a shell there, but it's more like the membrane, kind of like maybe like the membrane of a water balloon, something like that, just holding it in place. But it's not hard. It's not hard. They go through an aquatic gilled larval stage. Larval simply means developing. So what this means is aquatic, they live in the water. They have gills. Gills are used to take oxygen out of the water, and they do that while they're still in a developing stage before they become frogs or toads or whatever else they're going to be. They have soft, scaleless, glandular skin. Glandular means that they often secrete something like slime or mucus and other things. So the difference between an amphibian and a reptile, reptiles have dry, hard, scaly skin. Dry, hard, scaly skin. Yes, they're often in the water, but as soon as they come out of the water, it just comes right away. Amphibians have soft, slimy skin. Soft, slimy skin, no scales. No scales. So if there's a reptile or an amphibian and you're not sure which one it is, if it has scales and it's dry, in other words, dry like you could wipe the water off it and it would be dry, that's a reptile. If it's slimy or covered in mucus or something like that and it does not have scales, it's an amphibian. Amphibians do not live in the ocean. Why? Oceans are salt water. They cannot live in salt water. Most have 2 pair of limbs. Most breathe with gills at early stages in their life, and then the gills are replaced by lungs. The gills actually just fall off later on once the lungs are developed. Most can respire. Respire is a fancy word for breathe, through their skin. So literally oxygen can go in and out through their skin. They have 3-chambered hearts. Like a lot of reptiles, amphibians have 3-chambered hearts. They're not very effective. What does this mean? Well, I got 2 chambers. I got one. The first one is a blue arrow that receives blood from the body. It goes into the right atrium. And then from the right atrium, it goes down into a ventricle. In 4-chambered hearts, we have a left and a right ventricle. In 3-chambered hearts, they just have 1 ventricle. And what the ventricle does is it pumps blood out. The problem is some of the blood that doesn't have oxygen goes out to the body, which is poor. It doesn't have oxygen. It goes back and it can't do anything because it's not carrying the oxygen it's supposed to. The other part of the blood gets pumped to the lungs. And then from the lungs, it comes back again from the body. And then part of that blood gets pumped again. So you see, what we want is we want blood that has oxygen to go to the body. That's the red arrow. Oxygen-rich blood goes to the body. But the problem is some of the blood that goes to the body doesn't have oxygen, and some of the blood that goes to the lungs already has oxygen. So you can see it's not very efficient. It's not very efficient. A 4-chambered heart, super efficient. Works really, really, really well. But a 3-chambered heart, not so much. Frogs, the first group of amphibians, they are leaping, tailless amphibians with smooth skin. This frog is brightly colored, and the reason he's brightly colored is very often that's an indicator to other animals that he has some kind of a secretion or poison on him. And the bright colors are like, you better not eat me, stay away, or you're going to get sick or be poisoned. So poisonous. In fact, the most poisonous, venomous creature in the world is actually a tree frog. Has the strongest, most toxic poison, even more than a rattlesnake, even more than a scorpion. Tree frog has the most toxic venom in the world. And it's brightly colored. So that's the warning, stay away. Some other examples of frogs would be the bullfrog, the gray tree frog, and notice its camouflage, how it blends in very well. The green tree frog, again, this one's brightly colored, could blend in with the trees. Some of the frogs also do not have any poison, but they are brightly colored like poisonous frogs, and they simply use that as a trick. The leopard frog, because of its spots. And those frogs. Let's talk about toads. Toads are leaping, tailless amphibians with rough, warty skin. So the only difference between a frog and a toad is frog skins are smooth. Toads have warty skin. Like the American toad. You can see all the bumps on it, all the warts. The common toad. The fowler's toad. This is actually a frog that eats small birds. Characteristics. They have powerful hind legs. This is both for frogs and toads. That are useful for hopping and swimming. And on the left, you see a frog hopping. On the right, you see, what does that look like? It looks like frog legs, deep-fried frog legs. Since they're really strong, powerful muscles, they're often a delicacy to eat. Most aquatic species have webbed feet. That helps them when they're swimming or paddling in water. They can practice external fertilization. External means that the eggs are fertilized outside of the body. So a female frog lays the egg, the male frog comes along and puts his sperm on top of the egg after the female has left. They lay thousands of eggs, so some of them will survive. Out of those thousands, you may only get 10 or 20 or 30 that actually make it all the way through, are fertilized, and are actually able to live. So they practice with thousands and thousands of eggs, knowing that only a handful of them are actually going to survive. They go through a complete metamorphosis. That is, the young looks completely different from the old. A complete metamorphosis. Go through a complete one. So what you do is the young is not going to look anything at all like the adult frog. They don't look anything at all similar. Okay? So metamorphosis literally means morph, means to change. Meta means to go through. So they're going through a change in which they don't look the same. They can respire, again, breathe into their lungs, into their mouths, or through their skin. And many of them, as mentioned, secrete poison in their skin, but most are not very toxic, except for that the tree frog, which is the most poisonous venom there is. But most of them are just like you get a mild headache or you get sick, things like that. So here's a difference between a couple of words. Oh, hello there. Eek, a poisonous snake. Well, actually, I'm venomous. The toxin delivery method is completely different. Hi, I couldn't help overhearing. That's correct. Venomous animals inject toxin. I'm poisonous, so I just secrete it. Hey now, some of us are both poisonous and venomous. Birds can be poisonous too, and mammals can be venomous. Quite right, everyone. Oh darn, lunch left. So the only key point to know is that venomous means you inject the poison or toxin. Poisonous means it's secreted on the skin. Salamanders. Salamanders are amphibians with tails. Moist scaleless skin, and they have no claws. So there's a finger, no claws for salamanders. They avoid sunlight and are seldom seen. They go through an incomplete metamorphosis, so the young somewhat look like the adult. That's what we mean by incomplete. There's still a complete changing, but it's close enough that you can say, okay, I could see where one looks like the other. But if you had a tadpole and a frog, no way you'd be able to say, oh, the tadpole, yes, the frog, they look identical. There's a complete metamorphosis. Some examples of salamanders are the giant Pacific giant salamander, the Japanese giant salamander, look at how big that one is, the hellbender, notice the camouflage, how well it blends in with all the rocks at the bottom, and mud puppies. Other salamanders, you can have axolots. They breed in the larval form but can metamorphose to an adult if their pond dries up. Axolotls. And then there's others like the Mexican walking fish and other salamanders, newts and efts. Newts and efts. The best way you know this is if around Halloween you have a witch's brew where they say eye of newt, wing of bat, something like that, should throw in a cauldron. Here's how you're going to remember them. Newt is the aquatic form. Newt has a W, N-E-W-T-S. W stands for water. The newt, N-E-W, W stands for water. That's the water one. And eft are the ones that are terrestrial. They're found on Earth, on dry ground. So the way you remember the difference between a newt and an eft, newt has a W, that stands for water. That's where they live. The red-spotted newt and the red eft. Others salamanders, like sirens, these are ones that lack hind limbs and have only front forelimbs. Four meaning like forward, not four is like the number. Forelimbs. The southern dwarf siren. And then our last group is the Sicilians, Sicilians. Sicilians are limbless amphibians, limbless. They're often confused for snakes. People see them and they often think, oh, it's a snake. Well, it could be a Sicilian. They are slender, worm-like, they live underground, have lungs, and have three-chambered hearts, just like many of the other characteristics of our amphibians, three-chambered hearts. They have lungs, and they're slender. Here's one called the beak Sicilian. Notice that it's actually got a face. A snake doesn't really necessarily have a face. So he's got two little eyes there and a little snout. There he is. See what I mean by a face? He's got eyes, a nose, and kind of a mouth. Kind of looks more like a face than a snake's does. This is a fish Sicilian. And that's as far as we got for today. So we'll go ahead and finish our notes on amphibians. And now you're going to watch the Bill Nye video on reptiles. And then in our next class, we're going to go through the reptile notes. If you have any questions, you can go back and watch this. You can stop it as you need to, obviously, and make sure you get all your notes filled out. So take care, God bless, and I will see you soon.